morning, everybody. My name is Brian Lopez. I'm the public education reporter for the Texas Tribune. Thank you for joining us in person and online for our conversation on school choice, public education, and the 2023 legislature. I want to start off by thanking today's sponsor, our major sponsor, Yes, Every Kid Foundation, and our supporting sponsors, Fast Growth School Coalition and the Texas Association of Mid-Sized Schools. Through corporate sponsors and donors, though corporate sponsors and donors underwrite this event, they play no role in determining the content, speakers, or line of questioning. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank our Texas Tribune members joining us in person and online today. We're grateful for your support. If you value events like this and you're not yet a member, please consider supporting the Tribune. Head to texastribune.org/donate. Some housekeeping notes. We'll have about 45 minutes of Q&A, and then we'll have about 15 minutes for audience questions. Please silence your cell phones. If you'd like to tweet for this event, please use the hashtag #TTEvents. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists this morning. First, we have Laura Colangelo. She is the executive director of the Texas Private Schools Association, an advocacy organization representing over 900 private accredited schools in Texas in the state legislature and in Washington, D.C. Prior to this role, she was the head of an Episcopal preschool in Austin, focused on providing a quality early childhood educational experience for a historically underserved population. Then we have Scott Muri, who has served as superintendent for the Ector County Independent School District since 2019. Previously, he served as superintendent of Spring Branch Independent School District in Houston, where he oversaw a redesign of the compensation system and recruiting efforts to more effectively recruit and retain employees. Then we have Michelle Smith, who joined Raise Your Hand Texas in 2018 after 8 years with Hillco Partners, where she focused on public school finance, school choice, assessment and accountability, facilities funding, transparency, and elections. With experience including work as a public school teacher, Smith has advocated on behalf of education-based profits, nonprofits, advocacy organizations, and superintendent-led associations. Randan Steinhauser is the founding partner of Steinhauser Strategies, an Austin public relations company. She has worked in more than 30 states on school issues, on school choice issue advocacy and grassroots campaigns, and currently serves as the National Director of School Choice for Young Americans for Liberty, as a Texas advisor and as a Texas advisor to EdChoice. Now we'll get started. So from first question, and we'll take it, as how we feel, who wants to answer first. As the legislature heats up, there's been a lot of talk about school choice, voucher-like systems. In the last 2 weeks, Governor Greg Abbott issued his most explicit support for a voucher-like program in the form of education savings account. And for our viewers, these are basically tax state-funded school accounts that a parent would have access to pay for things like private school tuition, homeschooling, in some cases, high school and college education. So let's start with this. Now that we know the priority for the governor, is this the right move for Texas?
Unequivocally, yes. I would argue that it is. That's my position here today. And I would say we've seen such a transition over the last 10 years as we've seen private school choice programs be enacted across the country. And while we've sort of been beating this drumbeat for years advocating for private school choice, it wasn't really until COVID that we saw parents coming out in huge droves. COVID really revealed a lot of deep cracks in our system. Parents were all of a sudden in a front row seat of what their children were learning, and they were oftentimes surprised at either what they were learning or perhaps what they weren't. They saw their schools closed down. They saw mask mandates. They saw questionable curriculum. We've seen school violence increase. We've seen bullying increase. We've seen our students' mental health go down. And so I would say that now we see a rise on an effort for universal education savings accounts because parents recognize that students should have access to a multitude of educational options, including private schools, including homeschooling, virtual schools. And so I think that now is the best time that we could possibly empower parents with education savings accounts. And I'm very proud of and excited to see Governor Abbott come out very strong on this.
I love to have a session where we talk about school choice because there's so much school choice in our public schools, and I know that Dr. Muri can really speak to that. I think that all of us saw some real challenges during COVID, and we have a lot of kids that we need to lift them up and make sure that they're getting a high quality education. That is the responsibility of the state, to make sure that 5.4 million kids are going to get the education that they need. And I don't think that just handing them out to other vendors or to other environments where we can't make sure that every kid is being served is not the best use of our taxpayer dollars.
Well, I'd like to start with saying that private schools, as a representative of private schools, we do not view ourselves in opposition to public schools. We are very appreciative of the Herculean effort it takes to educate the 5.5 million children in the state of Texas, and we consider ourselves a partner in that effort. And we do think it's time for some kids to have more options, and we're ready to make that happen.
We had a board meeting in our community on Tuesday night, and one of the topics was choice. And as a local school system, we are very proud of the choices and options that we provide. You know, public schools were created really on behalf of the opportunity we have to serve our own community. I have 7 elected trustees that are parents themselves. They talk about their choices. They're involved in the decision-making. In fact, they hold us accountable for making sure that we are meeting the needs of our own students. And school districts across the state of Texas are filled with choices and opportunities that are a reflection of their own community. And that is our responsibility to listen and understand and take care of the needs of the children that we serve. And certainly the pandemic has demonstrated to us that there are more opportunities that we have in public schools today to more effectively meet the needs of students. As we advocate for education in Texas, certainly the pandemic indicated that more funding, more opportunities to think differently about the type of supports that we provide. So certainly choices and options are something that we believe in, and we're very, as a public school entity, very proud of the choices and options that we provide, and are excited to continue to expand on choices and options based upon the requests of parents and the needs of our students.
Gotcha. And just to follow up on that, Scott, would you be in favor or against of an education savings account?
So I'm in favor of choices and options for moms and dads, and I'm in favor of public schools being supportive of the needs of our parents. And again, I think that we are responsive today. In fact, I don't think that I actually know that. We listen and adapt and adjust to the needs of moms and dads. And so I'm definitely a fan of investments in public education to make sure that we are effectively meeting the needs of students.
I'd love to just make a quick point here. So about 10 years ago, when, again, this conversation really started to heat up here in Texas, we were demonized for talking about school choice. And right now, we are now seeing, as a result of the efforts to advance school choice in Texas, our friends in the public school system talking about choice more than they ever have. And I think that's an example of how when you push for parents to have freedom and educational choice, it causes everyone to respond. So oftentimes we hear about if we have school choice programs, it's going to hurt our public schools. I think the opposite is true. I think that when parents are given an option, it causes all schools to respond and it causes outcomes to increase. We've seen this across the country where we have those school choice programs, that it causes outcomes for all students to improve.
We'll talk a little bit about that funding aspect. Before we get to that, I want to ask about accountability. I think that's one of the talking points here is, at public school, you have your trustees, they get the taxpayer money, you can hold them accountable. How are you guys open to, if something like this goes through, the same kind of scrutiny, accountability goes to private schools?
I think that's a me question. So private schools have 2 layers of accountability. First, parents can take the children out of the private school at any time. When I was a head of a school, my office was at the end of the hallway, and if anything went wrong in any classroom, I heard about it immediately. And I was responsible to the kids and to the parents and to the school in a very real and clear way, an immediate way. The second layer of accountability is what's called accreditation. And private school accreditation is a very robust system, and what it certifies is that private schools meet or exceed the standards that are in public schools. And the way this works is that it's a pretty labor-intensive system, but a group of peer leaders, school leaders from other schools, they come to the private school campus for usually around 3 days, and they look at everything. They analyze every aspect of the school: governance, finance, curriculum, teacher credentials, standardized test scores. They sit in classrooms, they talk to the school board, they talk to parents, they talk to the community, they look at carpool line, and they see and make sure that that school is meeting the standards of their accreditor, which then assures that it's at least the minimum standards that what children are getting in public schools. So it is very robust, it is very accountable, and a former commissioner of education once told me for public schools that he wished that they could implement a system like this accreditation system, because it allows schools to have a continual improvement process, and you're not just looking at test scores. You are looking at test scores, but not just test scores. You are looking at the whole program of the school and making sure that it is meeting the needs of those kids. And if it's not, they won't be accredited, and if they're not accredited, they won't participate in this program.
I love to hear Laura talk about accountability within private schools because it's such a robust system. It cracks me up that in our public schools in Texas, our entire accountability system for elementary school and middle school is based on one test on one day. Your entire A through F rating for your campus and your school district is based on the STAR test. Wouldn't it be amazing if we could measure every kid in the state of Texas on all of the things, the amazing things that are happening in our public schools? But instead, we have this narrative that our schools are failing and we need to send kids to a voucher school, but the only thing they're measuring our public schools on is the test. The contrast between those two is shocking. The other thing that we need to look at is actual student performance within voucher programs. If you look at Indiana, if you look at Louisiana, student performance is actually not increased when they go into voucher programs, and actually in Louisiana it's lower. So if we're going to look at student performance, we've got to look at the contrast to compare apples to apples between what's going on in our testing in our traditional schools and what's going on in our private schools.
Public schools are ultimately accountable to our children first, our parents, and our taxpayers. And so those three entities are really the drivers of what we do in public education today. We are fully accredited. Part of our opportunity is to be an accredited institution. Those are public-facing, very transparent opportunities for us to be held accountable. We have public board meetings. We have trustees that are publicly elected to represent the needs of our students, our parents, and our taxpayers as well. Each school very transparently displays publicly the results of our state accountability system, the results of our state accreditation process. So very transparent, but ultimately accountable to the children that we serve, to the families, the parents that we serve, as well as the taxpayers within our own community.
I'd like to respond to the studies that Michelle referenced on these that assess the efficacy of school choice programs. There are actually 17 random assignment studies that have been done on private school choice programs. 11 of them show an increase in, and again, we're talking about test scores because that's the easiest thing to measure. 11 show an increase in test scores in children who participate in these programs. 4 show a neutral, it's not statistically significant. And 2 were negative, but the 2 that were negative were in states like Louisiana. And what happened in Louisiana is they did a really bad job figuring out the system for private school choice, and they overregulated private schools, and none of the private schools wanted to participate in the program. So Louisiana is the cautionary tale in the school choice narrative, and that's what we don't want to replicate here in Texas.
So the cautionary tale is that I think there are a lot of private schools in Texas that are doing an amazing job. Laura has some of the best private schools in the state. They're also incredibly expensive. So our poorest kids are not going to be going to those private schools. They're going to be going to some strip mall private school that takes exactly the amount of the voucher, and when those kids aren't well served, they're going to be back in Scott School District. And so we have to talk about making sure that every kid is going to have a high quality experience, just like the ones that Laura's kiddos are getting in her private schools.
I would add that the cautionary tale is actually the kids who are stuck in failing schools right now. and those kids who have been stuck in failing schools. And in terms of accountability, I would say that the ultimate accountability is the parent, right? So if you're not happy with your child's education and they're stuck in a school that's not meeting their needs, you should be able to take those funds and hire the individuals that are going to teach your children, whether that's through a traditional private school or, again, homeschooling, tutoring, therapy. With education freedom, the parent is the ultimate accountability. If your child is not thriving, even in the best public school, that may not be the fit for your child. But right now, we have a situation where our parents are desperate for educational options. We have a huge wait list for our public charter schools. We have parents knocking down the door asking for support to get their kids the education they deserve. We have a real crisis when it comes to educating our special needs students. And so ultimately, I believe that parents should be able to choose the when, the where, the how, and by whom their children are being taught.
I agree. Our children do not deserve to be in failing schools, and I think very, very glad that you made that comment. That no child in our state, pre-K through 12th grade, deserves that opportunity. It is our responsibility as a public education entity to ensure that each of our schools, and really down to the kid level, has a successful academic experience. And that's why continued investments in the work that's happening in our public schools today are critical to ensure that we design systems and processes and schools and experiences that ensure that the success of every single child that we serve, regardless of their financial background.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, we had the accountability piece. There's also a big funding piece to this, right? There's the, obviously, taxpayer money would go to private institutions, but then there's also the fear from, especially, when you talk to rural school officials that don't have a lot of options, are already struggling financially. A kid gets pulled out, that's a little bit less money. And I'll start with you, Scott. Talk to me about, what has, the choices around you impacted you so far, and how do you feel like something like an education savings account would impact, your school district? And then we'll go from there.
Yeah, so healthy investments in public education affect us in a positive way as long as we use those dollars wisely to reshape, to improve the experiences that we have for children. And so as a public school superintendent, I know that continued investments in public education, increased investments in public education, and we've seen that over the last couple of years because of the pandemic. The federal government has provided additional dollars that we've been able to invest in our schools to improve outcomes for kids, certainly recovering from what the pandemic created, but also exploring some new investment opportunities, some new exciting experiences for kids that we've never been able to achieve before because we haven't had the type of investments that need to be made in public education. So I think, again, spending dollars wisely to invest in improvement and choices and options for children are important.
If I thought for a minute that a school choice program would harm public schools, I would not be sitting here and talking to you right now. Our organization supports these programs because we look at 20 years of data from Florida that shows that in the areas with robust private school choice programs, test scores go up in public schools, per pupil funding goes up in public schools, and families are happier with the choices they have. So that's what we look at, and we have 20 years of data now from a couple of states, really, for 20 years now, and we look very carefully at that to make sure that we are protecting public schools and we're giving families the choices that they want and need.
I guess I would just point out that we hear this constant drumbeat of money, money, money. Just give us money and we'll do better. Just give us more money and we'll improve the system. It comes back to the same talking points every time. We also have data that shows no matter how much money you spend on education, you're not going to fix a behemoth of a system that is antiquated, outdated, and simply there's not one system that can serve every individual unique child. And so we have to stop respectfully talking about funding the system, and we must fund the child. The child learns in a unique way, and it's only when that child is given the opportunity to find an educational environment that works for them based on their parents' desire for what they want their child to do and learn and see, and all of their potential is when we're gonna have real educational success. It's not about a system, it's about the kid.
So let's talk about the system for a second. The Texas Constitution requires us to fund a public education system. TEA's mission is to provide for children in the public school system and improve those outcomes. It's in the constitutional language of our state. The second thing is that system that is so dehumanized by people who talk about it that way is filled with people. So every single one of you knows a teacher, you know a bus driver, you know a custodian, you know a counselor. Those are the people in the system that are taking care of 5.4 million kids every single day right now while we're sitting here. And there are people across the nation that are using their political platform to dehumanize those people that are serving your children. It's a national talking point. It doesn't resonate with Texas values. Texas values are about community. They're about lifting up your neighbor. They're about supporting our rural schools and our rural communities that are the heartbeat of our state. And it gets really old to hear people talk about the system when the system is full of people and it's full of your neighbors.
I think we're just responding to the fact that it always comes back to funding for the system, right?
So let's talk about funding. So Texas is funding students $4,000 below the national average. Our teachers are funded $7,000 below the national average. We're 42nd in the country in per student funding, and so we can't make the argument that money doesn't matter because Texas isn't funding the system adequately. If you go to funding every private school student in the state of Texas with a voucher, it's going to cost the state $3 billion a year. That is on top of the $4 billion that we're already paying for charter schools. So that's $7. Let's throw $7 billion a year. And let's throw the homeschool kids in there too. That's an additional $3 billion. So we're talking about a $10 billion price tag for the state of Texas to send kids out of an already underfunded public education system.
I also just very quickly, and then want to just make one more quick point. When we are talking about funding, I think it must be stated, right, that we have superintendents, and this is public data, making over $300,000 a year, when the teachers in your district are about $10,000 below average for the state in terms of their salary. So when you actually start to follow where those dollars are going, they're not going to the classroom, they're not going to the teachers, they're not going to the bus drivers, they're not going to the cafeteria workers. They're going to the bloated bureaucracy at the top, making over $300,000, $400,000 a year as a superintendent. Public data, check it out, and ask yourself, why are we paying so much for the top when we're not investing in our classrooms? Specifically, we're not investing in our students.
Thank you. When a teacher has to go to Walmart and buy basic supplies for the students in their classroom, we're not investing enough in public education. When a teacher has to take on a second job to support their family at home, in addition to their day job of teaching, we are not investing enough in public education. And that's not just in the state of Texas, that's across our country that happens daily. And I've worked in 4 different states. This is my 30 blah blah year in public education. And every single year, whether teacher or administrator, there's been a fight for funding in education. We have never ever received during my career and in any place that I've ever worked sufficient investment to do the appropriate work that we need to do for children. Ever. Again, if teachers have to go to Walmart and use their own money to buy basic supplies for their classroom, there isn't enough of an investment in public education. Imagine a day when we actually received the type of financial investment that we deserve, that our children deserve. Imagine what we could create for children. Imagine the choices and options that would exist in our state today. I can't wait for that day to occur.
I want to move a little bit to kind of the political kind of scene that's taken place that's kind of pushing some of this stuff. We talked a little bit about COVID and, other states kind of, other governors using, things like critical race theory, masking, and other things to kind of fuel this school choice issue. Can you guys talk about, what's happened in Texas? I know, we've chatted, maybe 10 years ago, somebody from, a school choice organization would go into the Capitol and receive a hard no. And now they're saying, lawmakers are more willing to sit down and talk about this issue. What's been going on behind the scenes at the Capitol.
Well, I'm just hearing momentum from parents wanting more other options. We don't enter into the cultural fight. We just want to make sure that children are receiving the education that they need. And so I'm having conversations I've never had before in 10 years. The legislators wanting to talk to me, understand this concept and how it would work, and the fact that there will not be a mass exodus from public schools. That has never happened in any other state that has done this. It will not happen in Texas. What will happen is that families get to choose the education that fits their child. And so those are the conversations I'm having. I know that's not quite the question, but maybe someone else.
I think there's a lot of momentum. I think it doesn't just come from inside the Capitol, but really it's coming from outside the Capitol. It's coming from parents who want these educational options. One of the largest and most vocal supporters that we've seen kind of rise up out of the ashes of COVID are actually educators. We've seen in other states where they have education savings accounts, specifically Nevada, where they've had a proliferation of innovative micro schools. They've had homeschooling co-ops. They've had educators who say, I wasn't getting the support I needed because those dollars were going to the top, the bureaucracy, they weren't going into my classroom. So I'm going to leave this system that just isn't appreciating me, and I'm going to go start my own program. I'm going to tutor 10 kids a week and still make more than I was getting by a system that just didn't fund the students and the teachers. It was funding the bureaucracy. So I think that's really exciting to see that educators are now coming out and saying, hey, this is really an interesting approach, and I love educating kids, and I want to be a part of the solution, not a part of the problem.
I think it's sad that we're putting teachers in that situation where they have to choose between tutoring 10 kids in a micro school or staying in the public school system that they really love. We've spent months and months and months talking to teachers all over the state. Raise Your Hand Texas has. And they're saying to us, I don't want to leave my public school. I want to serve my community. It's just really difficult right now because I'm not getting the support that I need, either because our public schools are underfunded and our teachers, don't have the salaries that they deserve, or just that they're constantly under attack. It was just so interesting at the beginning of COVID that everybody was praising their teachers, and now we're looking at, them not being able to use the books that they want in their classroom, or constantly being criticized, when the reality is, I am a public school teacher. Most of the public school teachers I know are incredibly politically conservative. They don't bring politics to their classroom, but they're not there teaching the things that they're being demonized for. They're busy teaching math, they're busy teaching reading, they're getting ready for the STAR test. It's the spring semester. Those are the things that they're doing, and they just want to teach instead of somebody going after them and constantly attacking them and them feeling like they have to leave the system.
I would say there's a disconnect between what individual teachers want to do in the classroom and what Texas Association of School Boards and other bureaucratic entities are proposing, whether that's gender pronouns or, Marxist curriculum. There are these things that are happening that are actually causing parents to react. You may laugh, but the parents who are not laughing are those who are seeing their values and their morals being undermined when they send their kid to school. There's being a wedge that is driven between the trust between parents and their kids, and this is intentional. We see it happening. This is not just a talking point. This is why this movement continues to grow.
So the teachers in Texas follow a set of standards that were approved by our State Board of Education, the Texas TEKS. That's what our teachers teach, pre-K through 12th grade in the state of Texas. They use a curriculum that is designed locally within their own community that is rigorous in nature and aligned to the Texas TEKS. That's what our teachers teach. And any resident, any taxpayer in our community can visit our public websites to see that information. Our curriculum is publicly available. People can peruse that curriculum and see what happens in our classrooms. Our teachers want, as do our administrators, want our kids to have experiences in mathematics, in the sciences, in the arts, in physical education, and they provide those experiences to children every day. For generations, our teachers have been shaping and molding the citizens that we are today. I am a very proud product of public education, and appreciate and value what my teachers instilled in me, and that was the state curriculum from, in that time, the state of North Carolina, or the state standards. and we used a local curriculum, but very proud of those experiences. And our teachers and administrators continue to shape the next generation of educators that we'll see in our classrooms tomorrow.
Is there a, in this fight, in this, battle for, whatever comes out and, at the end of the session, is there a middle ground to be found? Is there something where, both, advocates on both sides of this issue can say, we can come to agreement to this, and, I'll start with Michelle on this.
Oh, hi. Right. Is there a middle ground? I think the middle ground is making sure that our legislature is working with taxpayers to hold school districts accountable for what they're supposed to be teaching and what they're not supposed to be teaching. There is a process for parents to go through that if they're not happy about what's being taught in their school, or they don't want their kid to hear a particular lesson or something like that, there is a process, and there is a locally elected body of people that are helping them get through that process. If we were to just blow the doors open, I hate to say this, but it's the truth. There are some great homeschool parents in Texas, so don't get me wrong. There is a homeschool network in Ohio that is a homeschool network of Nazis. And they are teaching their kids to be good little communists. I want my local school board to be holding their campuses accountable for what they're teaching. I want the legislature to be holding school boards accountable for what they're looking at in their communities. I don't want to blow the doors open and just let people teach whatever they want, whenever they want, to use an education savings account to buy a kayak or a cage for their bunny or a trip to wherever. There is a reason that we have the process that we have, and I want for the legislature and for our local school boards to work within that process.
This device provides a great deal of choices and options for me as an individual and as a citizen today. And I think our world is filled more and more so with choices and options. And I've seen not only in our own school district, but the 1,200 districts across the state of Texas continue to expand choices and options for children. We have a moral and ethical responsibility for the children in each of our communities to serve them, to provide a high-quality academic experience for them, to make them well-rounded and productive citizens in this community, and we'll continue to do that. We should, as a public school entity, continue to evolve. We appreciate the feedback and input that we continually get. Our state legislators continue to evolve laws and policies that inform the work that we do locally. Our locally elected Board of Trustees continue to listen and receive input from their own community in which they represent and shape and mold their own local school districts to ensure that we are effectively meeting the needs of students. So I think the opportunity for compromise is we, as a public school entity, should continue to mold and shape and evolve to effectively meet the needs of every child that we are responsible for serving in the state of Texas today.
I just keep hearing, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. That we know better. It's an insult to parents to think that they should not be the primary educator, and if they feel unable to or unequipped to do homeschooling or to participate in an ESA, guess what? You don't have to. You can still go to your neighborhood school. It's an optional program. If it works for you, why should you not have that freedom as a parent? If the neighborhood school, again, even if it's the best school, isn't working for your kid, why should you be forced to send your kid there? I just argue that you shouldn't. You shouldn't have to. And ultimately, I would say, we can find these pocket of examples, but what we know is happening across the board in Texas and everywhere in our country right now is the mental health of our students has suffered tremendously because our public schools kept their doors closed when our private schools opened their doors and continued serving students. They want to force parents to be second to the government when it comes to educating their children, making decisions based on what's best for the system, not for the kid. And so I would just say that we're at a point right now where parents have had enough, and they are the ones on the front lines demanding this. This movement is growing, and it certainly is exciting what we see happening from Governor Abbott on down in terms of making this happen in Texas.
I would say that what we're talking about is the middle ground, because what we know from, again, the 20 years of data that we have studied is that most kids are going to stay in their local public school. And they will, and they're well served, and that is wonderful. What we are talking about is families and kids who aren't being served. And if you look at the profile of the student that takes advantage of these programs in other states, it's not the A student, it's not the kid that's on the football team or in the band or in these exceptional programs in public schools. It's the kid that's the C student that can't quite find a place in their public school and they need another option. So I'm not sure who thinks we're going to blow the doors open and buy kayaks, but we are going to offer an opportunity for families to access another educational options because families do, the parents know the child better than anyone else. And so it's a smart program, it is a middle ground, and it will help both public schools, private schools, families, and children of Texas.
But most of the education savings account programs that we're looking at across the nation right now are funding students that are already in private schools. So
But the Senate has never passed a bill that funds the Texas Senate has never passed a bill that funds current private school parents.
Correct. And that is the conversation that we're having this session. That's why we're all sitting here right now, is because we're having a different conversation in Texas right now, which is to put money in the pockets of parents that are already sending their kids to private schools.
I guess going off on this kind of middle ground thing, right? You hear a lot about, right now what's being proposed essentially is a universal kind of education savings account. It's not been debated or taken up yet in any committee. We haven't started that process yet. But, a lot of what I'm hearing is, we can cut out the rural school districts for, the initial pilot of this program, or, we can put these safeguards or hold harmless kind of things in this bill, so it won't impact public schools. I mean, starting with you, Scott, I mean, how do you feel about this? And going back to this question, I mean, how would it impact? Do you think something like this would impact, your school district?
So your comment was interesting. So a carve out for rural Texas. I'm from West Texas, so many of the districts that are in my area are rural. But I also think about our kids of poverty. So I wonder, I've 65% of the students that I serve in my own school district. The majority of students in Texas are kids of poverty. So I'm curious, are we going to cut out those kids as well? So we'll eliminate rural because it would have a negative effect. But are we also going to eliminate from this possibility our students of poverty, because it would not affect them? I mean, I'm not sure, Michelle, how a family of poverty would be able to leverage this opportunity to seek something that's better and different for them. So that's a question that I have in my mind too. I wonder the benefit to, at least in my own district, the 65% that couldn't receive this and do anything with it, or the kids in rural Texas that could receive it, but there are no options around them. So just a question that I have.
I probably have an answer. So in rural communities, what we've seen happen is that when families are given those dollars that would otherwise go to a school that isn't working for them, we see the market respond. We see those micro schools. They can access virtual learning. They can transition into homeschooling, which maybe beforehand wasn't an option for their family. So we see that parents are actively engaging in their children's education, no matter where they live, rural or urban or suburban, wherever. We also know that across the country, the students who benefit the most from school choice programs are those students from low-income minority households in urban communities. That is who initially this conversation was targeted at, serving those students who need it most. Those students who are stuck in those chronically failing schools. How long do we have to wait? How much money do we have to spend? Those are the questions that we're, quite frankly, still waiting on answers to. But what we've seen is that parents are now saying, I don't want to be cut out. I don't care where I live, rural, suburban, or urban. I want to be empowered to choose the best education for my child. And so, I think ultimately it comes back to not thinking about there's a system solution, that this is a parent-driven, child-centered solution.
We as an organization would like to prioritize low-income kids and children with special needs, because those are the kids that need the options more than the other families. And so we would support that. But again, we need to make sure that it's a system that works for everybody. And it's clear, based on the data across the country and all the states, that this is not going to harm the public schools. It's going to give those low-income families, and the average median tuition of private schools across the state is $9,831. So I know in urban areas that tends to be a little bit more, but statewide, the cost of a private school is reasonable and families can access it. Private schools already have scholarship programs. 99% of private schools offer scholarship programs. And what this would do would augment that system and allow more families into the schools that could serve their needs.
It's inevitably going to hurt rural schools in Texas because it's going to cost the state so much money and it's going to increase over time. So back to the example I used earlier, that it could cost, $3 billion if you're just talking about funding students that are already in private schools, adding on students on top of that, it's just going to cost a lot of money because we have a lot of kids in Texas. I also worry about when small numbers of kids are leaving their rural school, it's going to drastically affect that campus. Those costs don't change over time. It's going to decrease the number of teachers. You're going to be looking at overcrowded classrooms in rural schools. Unfortunately, we have an example just this last week of a rural school district south of Fort Worth that somebody from the agency was talking to a special ed parent and counseling them to support a voucher program. This is somebody from the agency that was counseling a parent to support a voucher program and to leave their public school and to, quote, stick it to the public school there in that community. And they went on to say that who cares if that school district loses a fourth grade teacher? Because that agency person knows that when kids leave small school districts, it changes the staffing patterns of a campus inevitably. So even our agency knows that money is going to be leaving our rural communities. Teachers are going to lose their jobs. We're going to have overcrowded classrooms, and the agency, some people at the agency are wanting to stick it to our school districts.
We can Chicken Little this all day long and say that the sky is falling, but the fact of the matter is it hasn't. In the states that have implemented school choice programs, that has not happened. And so I just don't want people to dismiss this idea out of fear without understanding that this will help public schools, private schools, and families.
Before I think we're good on time here. If people want to start lining up for questions, we could get started. And just for questions and time's sake, we have until 9 o'clock. So no speeches before the question, just as concise as you can, and address it to who you want the question to answer. So if you guys want to start lining up, I think we could get started.
Oh my gosh. Real quick, just as a comment, and I don't mean to be snarky, right? But somebody paid a CEO of a charter school $900,000 the other day to go away, right? And that wasn't magic unicorn money. That was taxpayer money. And so, briefly, because my superintendent is sitting next to you, we are his worst nightmare. We call him all the time. We hold him accountable. And what worries me is in this system that potentially is going to be developed. Yeah, okay, sorry. The system that we're developing, and this is my question, is that this issue, we have yet to provide accountability for the money that's going to be dumping into these private schools. And I understand that there are, a myriad of checks and balances. But to use your own words, if my accountability system is a headmaster or headmistress sitting at the end of a hallway when there's a problem, that's not a universal accountability system, right?
It's a real accountability.
Well, no, but I'm saying that you can't bet that that's going to hang for the whole system. And then in the model that's being proposed on the other side, we, as elected officials, have to look at A through F systems, and whether it's flawed or not, right, that's our system. I haven't heard anything coming out of the private schools or this new model that's being designed. What's your accountability system going to be, right? I mean, I understand yours, but yeah.
Well, first, I would love to just take a moment to talk about charter schools, because I think it's really important that we understand that in Texas we have a vibrant thriving charter community that is serving a diverse array of families. And one of the interesting things about charter schools when it comes to accountability is that if a charter school doesn't continue to perform and it doesn't do the job that it's set out to do, it will close down. I don't know the last time that a traditional ISD school closed down for having poor results or having kids failing or a number of different issues that we see faced every single day. So accountability, in my opinion, as mentioned, is that parents are the ultimate accountability. If their child is not succeeding in the classroom, they're going to go and they're going to find a different option. We believe that parents know their children better than anyone. Right now, they're sending their children to a school where they're trusting that things are getting done. And what COVID revealed was that not only were they not learning in the way they should be, but in many cases, they were learning things that their parents just totally disagreed with. Or their schools were closed. Or they had a substitute for half of the year. So the accountability is the parent. And if they're not happy with the way that their child is being educated, they can take those funds and go somewhere else.
Thank you. But then the system has to be developed for that accountability. And I'm not hearing that planning part of it. So how I feel as a taxpayer and an elected official is that we're going to be doing all this after the fact. So we're going to be pumping in millions of dollars into a system where at some later date we'll comprehend accountability.
And we're seeing that happening. We're seeing that happening in Arizona right now. They have a really large education savings account system program, and there are bills being filed that would add accountability to the system because people know that if you're going to send that much money out of your state budget, that somebody needs to be looking at apples to apples to compare and see if those kids are really being served. I get that parents, should be able to make decisions for their kids. They are making decisions for their kids. If they want to move to another district, if they want to transfer to another school, if they want to pull their kids out and do something else, that's great. But it's the taxpayer that needs to know that those dollars are being well spent.
Hi. I have, I consider it sort of a unique experience. I taught high school English for 10 years in a Catholic school, and then I switched to public school and was a middle school librarian. So one of the things that has been brought up before, but I think it's really important, at the private school, the school board were they're the donors. They're the people that, have sort of clout. And I noticed that they would turn over every 2 years, and I felt like someone who was even just 10 years there knew more of the history of the school and what we had gone through. And it was just frustrating that these people were invited and they weren't elected publicly. And I love that public schools elect their trustees. I think it's super, super important. And they are held accountable by the voter. The other thing I'd like to mention is if we want to value our teachers, they need to make a living wage, as we mentioned, and private school teachers make a lot less. I taught, my last year in a private school was 1999, and if I taught 30 years, I would never break 30,000. I know that things have changed, but not that much. And we know that there's no TRS for private school teachers. We know that in the charter schools you mentioned, there's lots and lots of turnover. We lost a lot of our, sorry. I just wanted to make those points. I'm really concerned in those two things, elected trustees and a livable wage, and I worry that privatizing will hurt teachers long-term in terms of, basic cost of living.
Private school teachers generally do make a little bit less than public school teachers, but teachers are drawn to that experience because of the values of the school and the experiences they have teaching in a private school. So you're not wrong.
Oh, okay, that's the only answer. Hi, my name is Julia Brookins. I'm a parent. Sorry, My name is Julia Brookins. I'm a parent of a Texas public school student and a historian of social integration. So I have a question about that. Aspiring to universal school choice seems to undercut an older American tradition of common schooling, including its mission, to inculcate shared civic virtues based on a sense of social unity and common public purpose. Can the concept of choice really do as much work for social cohesion as the notion of commonality? Where and how do children develop a sense of common civic belonging within a statewide system in which private schooling is the norm? And is there research about this?
There is research on this, and actually the findings are that students that participated in private school choice programs have increased political tolerance and civic participation
Relative to,
relative to students that didn't participate in a school choice program.
but not necessarily the public school versus the private school.
It's students participating in the private school choice program show increased political tolerance and civil engagement.
But it doesn't necessarily tell us what they feel about their neighbors or their country or voting and that kind of thing.
Well, I would say political tolerance means that you are committed to your community and respect the opinions of other people.
I think the foundation of this question just goes to the principle of I believe that parents are responsible for educating their children first and foremost. And if that is not the choice that they make, then we should have an opportunity for them to send their child to an educational environment that works for them, that matches their values. And ultimately, I believe that government funded does not need to equate government managed.
Well, I guess the issue of values is kind of what's underlying the question. The idea is that we're all aspiring to share values. And I feel like the way you're presenting the question doesn't really assume that. It says, oh, well, I'm a parent, I should have my own values and go over here, and you guys can go over there, and we can just do our own thing. And I don't know that that's necessarily a strong foundation for a democratic society.
Well, the beautiful thing about choice is that if you want your first grader to wear a mask, you can go find a school that will put a mask on your first grader. But if you don't share the idea that your first grader needs to wear a mask in a choice environment, you can find a school that matches your values. If you want your children to learn certain things in a landscape of options, you can find an opportunity for your child to learn in an environment that matches your values. Right now, many Texas families feel like our values are being undermined in the public school system. There's no question about that.
I grew up in a military town, not far from here. And I went to a wonderful high school, a public high school that had so many languages and so much diversity of thought. And that's exactly what I want for my kids. It's exactly what I want for every kid in Texas. And I hope it's what the legislature wants for every kid of Texas is a diversity of thought. And I think that's what we're able to offer in the public schools.
Good morning, I'm Dee Carney. Thank you for each of you presenting your beliefs about vouchers. And my question is, will you or your organization, would you support putting this measure on a ballot and letting Texans make the decision?
I absolutely would. I think that Texans already make their decisions by whom they elect, and I think it's important that they hold their elected representatives accountable for what they believe in. And so I highly recommend that any constituent contact your lawmaker. That's why they're there, whether you're for it or against it. I think that if it doesn't get done this session, and there were some effort to do that, I would support that. I think the more you can include voters in this process and more you can include families, then absolutely.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, it's our job to present the data and then let the people decide what it is that they want, however that is, either through elected officials or a ballot measure.
I think we also need to, I'm sorry. I think we also need to tell the whole story. So when I went to my hairdresser the other day and I said, we're talking about vouchers. And she said, what's that? And I said, you're going to send money to you're going to allow parents to take their money and go to a private school or do a homeschool. And she said, that sounds amazing. I would have wanted that for my kid. She said, why are you talking against that? And I went down the list. They don't have to accept all kids. They don't have the same accountability system. They're not held to the same curriculum as public schools. And the longer I went down the list, not trying to persuade her, just making the list, she said, that sounds like a terrible idea. And so if you're going to put it on a ballot, you have to tell people the whole story, because when you ask somebody, would you like some money? The answer is yes. But when you tell them the whole story, it creates complexity in their mind. That they say, that doesn't feel right, that doesn't smell right. Tell me more, because this doesn't seem like it's right for all kids.
A fully informed voter makes a wise choice, and so absolutely. fully informed.
While we wait for the next question, I would just like to add also that I would love to see school board elections happen at the same time as other elections so that voters can be truly informed on who's running for those positions and not special elections that just a select few know when they're even happening or who's running for those offices. So just a little tidbit.
Howdy. I'm Barbara Williamson. I am from Austin and a byproduct of the private and public school systems. And I heard you mention that there is not a concern of mass exodus from the public school systems, which I can understand. However, my concern is the variety in educational interactions that happen within school systems. And how is this not going to create a stratified school system for our children in poverty and therefore create less opportunities for them?
Because the children that need another option, that are not being well served, those few children who take advantage of this program are going to get the education that they need. And then the children that stay in the public school system will, thanks to these efforts of these guys, get an improved educational experience.
So I guess the question for me would be, if you have a student in need and they come to a private school that costs $25,000, $35,000 a year, are you going to be able to accept that student for the cost of the voucher?
There's a process, a scholarship process, and you determine the school has a certain amount of money, and they will interview and they will have an admissions process, and then that child could come with the amount, and it's not a voucher. I know we haven't gotten into this, but I've been beating my head against the wall. We're not talking about vouchers. Vouchers are direct payments to schools. We're talking about education savings accounts and tax credit scholarships. So we can get into that. I don't know if we have time to go through that, but anyway, I think I'm just going to have to give up that ghost and fighting that fight.
So the ESA that's $10,000 and the school costs $35,000, they're going to say, welcome in. We'll take your $10,000.
If they can meet the needs of that child.
We'll pay for your uniform. We'll pay for your books. We'll pay for everything. Just come on in.
Well, it depends on the school. It's not going to happen every day, every time, but many, many children will have opportunities.
We'll go to the next question. We're about to run out of time.
Hi, my name's Claire. I'm a parent. I have two young kids, a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old. The 5-year-old's in pre-K. So I'm at the very beginning of this journey, and I love my local school district. I support them. I'm on the Education Foundation. I fundraise for it. And I'm curious what you say to parents like me who want to support my local ISD. I feel like we do live in the middle ground. I could send them to a charter if I wanted. I could pay for a private school if I wanted to, but I want to support this public good. If we introduce these education savings account, it's going to take money away. It's not going to be a good choice anymore necessarily. So what do you say to people like me who want to keep our money there and don't want to see this introduced because of what it's going to do to the local ISDs?
I say thank you. And continue to be engaged like you are. Continue to talk to your child's teacher. Continue to serve on the foundation that you're serving. Continue to be an advocate for your child's teachers. Celebrate them, honor them. Continue to challenge and ask questions. Continue to do that. Support your kids. Make sure you're having regular conversations with them as they matriculate through the system. When you hear something that's unusual, call your child's teacher. Call the child's principal. Make sure that you maintain your full engagement, stay informed, and then be supportive of the process and encourage us to continue to evolve so that we're effectively meeting the needs of your children. But I say thank you. You're doing the right thing.
And could I just respond to that with we're going to take this conversation, we're almost done, take this conversation and go to the Capitol and continue this discussion. A lot of you people sitting here will be doing that down the road here. But I would like to make a plea for civility in this discussion. And I would like to say that we should do two things. One, not deliberately give misinformation about programs like this, that it's going to destroy public schools and just make terrible things are going to happen, because it won't. We know that from other states. And also, two, let's respect the actors in this arena, the public schools, the private schools, the charter schools, the homeschool families, and not demonize them, because the children of Texas deserve an honest and truthful policy discussion. And that's what we need to give them and make that decision.
I think we have time for one more question.
All right, hi y'all. So I'm hearing a lot of a narrative that the people who need it the most, the students that need it the most, will sort of flock to private schools if that's the best choice for them. But from what we've seen in Arizona recently and some other states, the majority of students and parents that are choosing private schools once vouchers come into effect are students that are already there. So that funding is going to people that can already afford, whether it's with the supplement of a scholarship or not, private schools. So how would you like to see Texas do things differently if something like an ESA was introduced, so that we're not just moving more towards increasingly, to borrow another question, stratified school environment?
I trust the legislators to look at the programs and to pick the best program in other states that provide the results that we want. And I am encouraged and thrilled to engage in that debate to make sure we create not a Louisiana system, because that's not working. Arizona is experimenting now with this universal thing, and we'll see how that goes. But we're ready and willing to do the work to make sure that we get something passed that's smart for everyone involved.
I fully support universal education savings accounts because I believe that every child should have the same opportunity. However, the reason I personally got involved in this effort 15 years ago was to serve those students that are from low-income minority backgrounds, to make sure that they too are given the same opportunities as their counterparts. I think that fundamentally we have a moral obligation to ensure that those students who need it the most are prioritized in the conversation.
I just hope that our legislators have a really robust conversation about other things besides vouchers and ESAs and all of those things. We need to talk about school safety. We need to talk about student mental health. We need to talk about funding. We need to talk about supporting our teachers. There are so many things that we need to do for our public schools right now, and that's where I want them to spend the bulk of their time this session.
And I got into this profession so that we could serve every, not some, not a few, not many, not most, but every child that we serve. And I think we have an opportunity in this legislative session and every session to continue to involve and invest in our local public schools to ensure that we are serving every.
So recent Supreme Court decisions have indicated that if a state has a voucher program, it has to be offered to religious schools as well. Do you guys have any concerns about government intrusion into religious schools because those schools are receiving government funds?
Well, the bills that we would support and the ideas we would support would protect religious liberties, and it's very specific language that would protect the private school and the religious private schools and allow them to remain true to the tenets of their faith, and that would be in the bill. So no, I'm not worried about that.
Well, I'm sorry about that, but I think that was our last question. We are out of time, but thank you for joining us here and virtually. And thank you to all of our panelists. And once again, a reminder that Tribune supporters keep events like this free and accessible for all. And we are a nonprofit that relies on members and donations, so feel free to go on our webpage and if you liked the conversation today, support us. Thank you.